Our topic this afternoon is, with our distinguished panel, is on leadership as mentor. And so what we're going to ask our panel to talk about is their view of mentoring, how they have individually served as mentors, how they have found that productive in their own professional lives, how they have found that productive in the lives of the people that they have mentored, and so on, in terms of health, in terms of medical practice, in terms of perhaps administration, personal development, or institutional development. And so I'd like to introduce our panelists, and then what we'll do is we'll ask them each to speak about 10 to 12 minutes, as is our custom, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. I'm aware that some of you may be needing to go on for a 1 o'clock class, and so we'll try to keep within the time frame. Our first panelist is Dr. Joanne Porter. Dr. Porter is Associate Professor here at Creighton University School of Medicine and Associate Director of the Department of Internal Medicine. Do I have that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And also spends most of her time at the VA. Next is Dr. Dan Wilson, who is the Chairman of the Department of Psychiatry. After that, we'll have Dr. D.K. Agarwal, who is Professor of Biomedical Sciences. Thank you. I should get my terms correct. I'm not, as you know, a physician. And then last in our panel, but certainly not least, is Dr. Syed Mohiuddin, who is the Chairman of the Department of Medicine here at the School of Medicine. And so first off, I'd like to ask Dr. Joanne Porter to begin our program.
Okay, thank you. And I'll apologize in advance. I brought a PowerPoint. You'll soon see maybe how we are differed by our specialties. I'm a general internist. I suffer from OC disorder. I cannot talk without a PowerPoint. But I tried to keep the words off of them. But I have notes too, just so you know, so I'm fitting the whole mold there. I think Father Zimmer gave us a fairly tough task of going parallel with our mentoring techniques and trying to balance that with the Jesuit tradition. I have to say I'm still a student in the Jesuit tradition, certainly. So when I tell you the different things that I'm going to tell you, hopefully you can pick out what I see as the Jesuit part of that. I just want to go over some things that I want to impart to all the trainees that I work with to help their lives be successful, and hopefully what are sticking points that will stick with them years from now after they've worked with me. And I just want to say I developed my style of mentoring as I hope you will develop your style of mentoring, and that is from being mentored. Sometimes the best ways to learn, though, are where you didn't have a mentor and you wish you did. And those are actually probably better teaching times. So let's see if we can work with this. Okay, so this describes my mentoring style right here. I could stick with this picture the whole time, right? General internist, Dr. Cox with the resident. Now, hopefully my style is a little softer, but I have to say I have never been in an assigned formal mentor-mentee relationship. So I mentor people when I have them as med students, when I have them as residents. I may spend a month with somebody. I may spend up to a year to 3 years, or sometimes I hire them on as colleagues and spend the rest of my professional life with them. But really, I'm kind of an on-the-fly mentor. And so a lot of these points kind of circle around that kind of style, and maybe you can get some use out of that. So the first one, sorry, I can't do the technology. So that brings me to the real point. I like this book. This book talks about how to develop or how to deliver compassion in 10 seconds in the exam room, because technology and insurance companies and everything else have taken over the time that you spend with the patient. And we're doing a lot less caring and a lot more science in the exam room. I think the same is true of mentoring with our students. Again, all those requirements take away time where you could kind of sit down with things. And so how do we tell people the important points, and how do we get our points across in a very short amount of time. I find that very little points are sometimes the most important points. So the mundane becomes the profound if you're really trying to be mindful about mentoring people during your interactions. So let me start with, basically these are going to be the next points of what I hope people that work with me will take into their life skills. And the first thing is finding human dignity in everything. And the hardest people to find human dignity in are our best teachers. And so how I deal with difficult patients who are scared, who are sick, who are suffering other stresses, if I can mentor people on how to deal with that, because that's difficult no matter where you are in your life, then I think that's an important skill. It really follows a Buddhist principle, and Buddhists believe that when you've gone through several lives and you become enlightened, or perhaps more like a saint in some people's philosophy, that those enlightened people come back as very difficult people to help you on your path and to help you become enlightened. And so I think that in those moments, hopefully I'm helping people develop that skill. That kind of relates to this next one, and this is a big point I really want my trainees to learn. Doctors like to be on the pedestal. That's a great spot to be, but if you take time, and we're not allowed to be there anymore, so don't worry, you guys don't get that chance. But if you take yourself off that pedestal, your best teachers are people that are non-physicians. And when you're an intern on call at nighttime, the best person to help you is that night nurse that's been there 20 years. And you can ask her or him what you would do in that case. And if you're open to that, then you're going to be a much better person. And you have to be open to that through the rest of your life. Your family members and your friends can teach you how to be a better physician than I can. And so staying open to that and trying to recognize those learning moments are real important. The next thing I like to impart is where I find joy in my job. So what energizes me, what keeps me going, what keeps me with those principles that I entered medical school with? I think because we're under a lot of press or stress, it's very easy to become negative. That's our human nature. And if I'm negative about my job, that doesn't help any of the students or residents that I work with become the best people that they can be. So if I can focus on that and remind people about that, then I think that I'm doing a good job and trying to tell people what motivates me. Right on the other opposite part of that is being honest about how I deal with what is difficult. So giving a difficult diagnosis or watching a patient die that I've taken care of. If I pretend like, well, you know, no big deal, got to move on, got to be tough, I don't think I'm helping people at all. And again, those are some of the best learning moments, and probably some of the best patients I've learned from are those people that die with such dignity. Oh, sorry. Okay, that's me, like 10 pounds lighter, and my horse is about 100 pounds lighter than he is. But my next point is balance. And that is, again, you know, you're supposed to be kind of, you know, this highfalutin doctor and dedicated to their career, but unless you find balance and, again, find something that helps energize you outside of medicine, you are not going to be the best person you can be. And you're going to slip into those negative habits and those types of things. And so I try to be, you know, show that I'm hardworking and things like that, but that's not all that there is with that, so. Now this is, I think, probably one of the most common points of mentoring, and that is, you know, helping wayfind for people. So helping break down barriers that were barriers for me, for people that are trainees. But there's a real art to this, and that is, there's sometimes where a map is the best thing to give to a mentee, and that is like turn left at 26th and then go right at Burt Street. But a lot of times, just pointing in the right direction and letting people find their way is a better thing. But it kind of depends on the situation, and that's sometimes something I struggle with what's the best way to do that. Telling people when they're going the wrong way or when their behavior is negative is also a very important part of being a mentor. and maybe one of the more tougher parts. That brings me to my next thing. So I'm always complimented when someone wants to be like me. But then 2.5 years later, they're like, I think I'll become a cardiologist. I'll be like, really? I thought you loved general medicine. And so letting people go, not having attachment to that concept of, well, you're going to be the best you can be as long as you're like me. That's something I have to work with through all the time as well. And so helping people and then helping them find their way on their own helps a lot. And then this slide is, hopefully I'm teaching all the people that I mentor to be good mentors themselves. One of the most energizing thing exists is knowing that I have touched you guys and then you guys will go touch other people. And then that great ripple effect that occurs with that. And that is something that gives, I think, every teacher, no matter what they're teaching, energy. And so reminding my mentees that they are something that energizes me rather than somebody that is, taking more additional time, I think is important. And this last slide is just reminding me that, again, I got to be mindful of all these things. There's just so many things, so many distractions throughout the day, and email and texting and, all of those things are starting to take away some of those things, those very short little moments in the day that I think can really help the trainees. So thank you for putting up with my PowerPoints. I appreciate it.
That was very nice.
Thank you.
I want to be like you when I grow up.
I love that. You're my twin.
That's right. Well, I haven't a PowerPoint or anything formally prepared, but it occurred to me that the term mentor, I suppose most people know, arises with character in the Odyssey and an epic story. And if I remember correctly, Mentor was a friend of Odysseus, and his son was given over to the palace for safekeeping during the Trojan War. And at some point, Athena shows up and disguises herself as Mentor and brings the child along, Telemachus. I think that's a very revealing aspect of mentorship, apart from a very early feminist kind of view of the world, having Athena in such a critical role. But I think it also is very similar to my own experience that we often don't know who our mentors are while it's happening. There are now formal programs, and there's a lot more discussion about mentorship. It was not any part of medical training formally when I was a student or resident, and it's very common now. I'm a little skeptical, I must say, of formal mentorship programs. I don't think they're a bad thing, and I think they may frequently do good, but I don't know that that's the way in which most mentoring arises. And maybe that's a product of my own perspective, my own background. From a very large family in a very small town, and with a bunch of older brothers in particular, I didn't really feel growing up that I needed more people to tell me what to do and how to behave and so forth. A little counterphobic is actually the term. And it's OCD.
Oh, sorry.
Get it right.
I better work on that.
Yeah. But in any event, I think in my medical training, Dr. Porter's comment about the teachers often not being physicians is very well taken. I remember as an intern I hadn't done any intensive care unit work as a medical student for a number of reasons, but be that as it may, the first night I was on call in the intensive care unit as an intern, I was very alarmed at the prospect and asked the head of the ICU at about 6 o'clock in the evening, kind of what to do. And he took me over to the panels and said, well, see all these dials? And I said, yeah. And he said, just make sure that they're pointed up all night long. I said, well, how do you do that? He said, well, if any of them go off kilter, call the nurse. And I thought he was joking, but he was actually quite serious about it. And the nurse, it was actually the nurse who taught me in much more detail how to manage the intensive care unit than did the director of the intensive care unit, who is a wonderful, wonderful guy. I'm not trying to run him down. And in my own career, when I look back, I think the most significant mentors were people I didn't realize were having such an effect on me at the time. Typically, that was the case. It was instead, I think, a situation in which people were very generous and very wise and reassuring, but also not challenging, but eliciting a greater degree of awareness about issues, about how my background had certain strengths and weaknesses, and how to be a better person, a better physician. And it happened very subtly. I think that it doesn't have to be that way, as I say. I mean, I think there can be formal programs and such, but I suspect that most of us, in looking on our lives, whether it's medicine or just character development, that we have had influences that we weren't really aware of at the time. Obviously, parents are hugely important, teachers, coaches for athletes, that sort of thing. But in fact, one of the most significant mentors in my life was somebody who I actively sought to avoid for about 2 years during my residency. And he was a very persistent individual and kind of lured me into his way of the world, and probably has taught me more about not just psychiatry and medicine, but about life and human beings than anyone else. And although a Jewish refugee from World War II, had kind of a Jesuit sort of ethical value and interest in examining things carefully. And in education, he was very devoted to education. I think I felt as badly when he passed away as I did when my mother and father passed away. It was a very significant thing. But at the time, it didn't. I sort of got badgered into working with him and didn't really want to. And then over time, we continued to work together for seven years, including after my completion of residency. So those are just sort of a few thoughts about it. I think I've found Creighton to be a uniquely attentive institution, the medical school at least, to students. And it's bittersweet that I'll be leaving, because I think out of all the places I've been, there's more of a concern about the students and their place in the institution than anywhere else I've been. Now, you pay handsomely for that privilege, but other private medical schools charge just as much, but don't care very much about the students. So that's my little sermonette. Father Zimmer assures me that more souls are saved with short sermons than long ones, so I'll...
What they tell me. Thank you. Dr. Agarwal.
Thank you, Father Zimmer. As you all know that we all get mentored right since our birth. We get mentored by our siblings, we get mentored by our parents, and then throughout our education. Real-time mentoring, I found it while I was at McMaster University in Canada and working with a professor who was not an easy person to work with. So initially I was really very disturbed with that, but it took me about a couple of years to realize where he was coming from. He wanted to make me independent, he wanted to make me strong, and he was genuinely interested in really my growth. And that's the place I learned that I would like to become something like this. Only thing which I found after coming from McMaster University, went to UBC Vancouver and joined here at Creighton in 1985, is that I have to be a good listener. As a mentor, I have to listen. You have to have a faith and confidence whom you are working with. And unless you develop that faith, you as a mentee or anybody else will not be able to share with you the problems or the things you want to talk. So you have to be a very good listener in that way. Also, you have to have some sort of role model as well. You have to give some examples to them, and which really gives them further confidence, yes, whatever we are talking, that I understand where I'm coming from. And then also, so first thing which I do as a modeling, not only to give them the examples, but also to really show them practically how it is done. And then coaching them. Coaching means that to ask what your goals are. Listen to your goals. Objectively evaluate your goals, where you are coming from. Why do you think you want to achieve these goals? What are your long-term goals? And I give my views to the students who come to me. And I tell them that don't listen everything what I say, but at least think about it and discuss with me what you think about this suggestion. So in that way, you develop back and forth dialogues with each other, and that opens them up. And then I coach them to really how to write something, how to write the grants, and how to do this and those, and take them. And then lastly, I really show them how to do it, some of the things. So that's the way I've been trying since I've been at Creighton. And at the same time, I learn from my mentees. It's not that they are learning from me. I'm learning from a lot of things from them. It's a both way street, and I have been very lucky that I have worked with many of them. Give you one example. One day, in month of June, I got a call from University of California, San Diego. It's Dr. Agrawal, congratulations. And I said, for what? One of your students got the best resident researcher award in the whole UCSD. I had a student, Richard Todd Allen. You can go online and look at it. He's the one, while he was a first-year medical student, came to me, said that I'm interested in research. So after talking with him a lot, he had married, he has children, and all those sort of things. So I asked him that, are you really serious doing this thing? So after 2 or 3 months discussion, he said, yes, I am that serious. I really want to do it. And then he came on board, did MD, PhD from here, and continued doing his research at UCSD and became the best researcher award, not only in his own discipline, an orthopedic surgeon, but also all disciplines. He got the best researcher award and was sent to Europe to present something. So those are the days we look forward to see that, yes, our mentees are growing and successful. And those are the things which make us happy. And those are the things I would like to see. So my goal remains that anybody whosoever comes on board to talk to me, have faith in me first, and then develop the open dialogue, and then seek my help. It also works both ways, that once you come to me, I have to follow it up with you. But if you don't come back again several times, then I will drop it. And same way, if you contact me and I don't respond to you, you will drop me. So it works both ways. So the point is that we have a lot of resources here at our institution, and it is all up to you how you want to take advantage of those resources. Take advantage of all of us, whatever we can do to make you better, not only as a physician, as a researcher, but as a citizen in general. So that has been my goal, and that's the way I've been working on. And as I said, that I've been learning a lot. It's a both two-way street, and I've been learning a lot in this relationship. Not only with medical students, I do work with undergraduate students. I used to mentor high school students, but as several of you might know, that I have mentored at least 33 graduate students. It's not actually mentoring. I was their advisor. Advisorship is a different from mentoringship, but sometimes they both go hand to hand. So 33 have graduated, and currently I have 11 graduate students. So not only I'm their advisor, but also I mentor them. What is the realistic goal of them in their future and how they can achieve, at least to show them the road. If I cannot do something for them, what their hope is, I find resources. I find other people on campus and refer those person to that person. So that's the way I've been working, and I'll be happy to answer any question later on.
I understand it's my turn now. I have a nod from Father Zimmer. There is one advantage of being the last speaker, that I can just simply say that I agree with already has been said and be done with that. But on the other hand, I could also say that I totally disagree with whatever has been said. And they don't have a chance to counter that. Dr. Zimmer asked me to give a brief presentation on what have I learned as a mentor, and particularly in the field of healthcare. And what I thought I might do is just give you a brief presentation of what I think a mentor should be. And I think it's now being one of the more senior members of the faculty, I thought young people like Dr. Wilson could learn from that. The mentors are a combination of things. They are coaches, they are teachers, and they are sometimes guidance counselors. So a good mentor is a combination of all of these things. But what they need is commitment. And you have seen some of the examples of how committed some of our mentors are or right here, that they're really totally committed to what they think is their role is. They need to develop a mutual understanding with their mentees, that what is that what the relationship would be, does the mentee expect from you, and you are to be clear of what you can provide your mentee. We need to be able to create a plan, a clear plan which the mentee could follow, and your advice would, whatever steps you need to do to complete that plan. And it needs to be tailored to individual mentees. Not all, don't need to say that all people are different. Mentees are different, mentors are. So we need to be very clear on that the plan we are creating. We need to recognize what the strengths and weaknesses of the mentee are and work on that. We should help encourage self-discovery. I think that's very important. I think that's an important role of the mentor. We should encourage them to succeed, but also allow them to fail. It's totally, a belief that mentor's primary role is to have your mentee succeed is probably incomplete. We need to be able to deal with their failures. We need to be able to understand that. And I think that's the way to proceed with the process. What being a mentor, especially in my field, has done for me is that I agree completely with Dr. Agarwal that it has made me a better listener. And I think that's a key need for a mentor. That he or she has to be a good listener. And that's not an easy thing to do. And it has made me a better teacher. It has made me a better leader. Because I needed to work with different type of people. I needed to work with not only junior faculty, senior faculty, but also administrators. So working with the varied background of people has allowed me to become a better leader. And certainly has improved my powers of observation, that I can understand people better. and I can work with people with different skills. I can work with people with different strengths and weaknesses. And finally, what mentoring does is allow different people to develop on their own track. But if you are able to do that, then you help your organization retain good people. And very often would help succession of a particular area. The development of leadership and succession can be accomplished. And it allows you to learn the need of your faculty, whether it be junior or senior, and have an appropriate sense of balance, an appropriate sense of how resources can be used appropriately. And certainly, it's an area we can all help each other. Mentors, as Dr. Agarwal said, that mentors need as much help sometimes as mentees do. So there's no reason for us to think that the mentors can accomplish everything. I think I will stop here.
Well, thanks to all our panelists for their insight. As we see, mentoring has a number of different dimensions to it, a number of different approaches. I think underlying all of it, any mentoring relationship, there has to be a concern for the other person, either on the from the part of the mentor to the mentee, and the mentee to the mentor. There has to be a concern for the person and where that person is coming from, what they have to offer, the total development of that human person. And so I think that, if we can say, is one defining aspect. It's integral to that relationship. There are formal mentors, informal mentors. There are structured programs or programs that, well, we can't even call them programs. It's simply a relationship. Sometimes a mentor is within the same system, sometimes a mentor is in a different system, or simply someone who has offered or is able to offer insight into one's position or approach or way of being. So at that point, I'd like to open up the table to conversation or to questions from people here now that we've finished our meal and we've heard our wonderful comments. So are there any questions?
Yes.
Yes, it's for everybody, but it was brought up that mentees should be able to fail, but do you feel like as a mentor in your experiences when you failed it helped you, or was it just kind of like a whoops, I'm sorry, or was there any progression from failing as a mentor more than failing mentees?
I can answer that question. I have failed many times in different approaches. And obviously, being a human being, we all, after failing something, we all feel really disappointed. But at some point, you have to start thinking, what we learned from this failure? What can we gain out of this? And especially when you are in your 20s and 30s, which are the best years of your life to achieve things, just by repenting, oh, I failed, I cannot do much, it's not going to gain anything out of it. Rather, learn from it and keep moving. And I must say that with the grace of Almighty Lord and the blessings of my mentors and others, I have succeeded. So the answer to your question is, failing, as Dr. Mohiuddin said, really is a good way to learn what you did wrong and how you can make it better. And learn from those. And that is not only in your approach or anything, like in research experiments. They fail all the time. And I tell my students, sit down, look at it. What did you do wrong? How else you could do it? That's just one example. Failing in any particular thing, in any course. Okay, what did I do wrong? How can I make it myself better? Just move on.
If I could just add, I think this is a very good question, especially among medical trainees, because most people who go to medical school have succeeded a lot at an early age. And very commonly, medical school or residency might contain the time during which they experience the first major failure of some sort. And clinically, I mean, I've seen a number of students at every institution I've been at where that happened, and they got depressed or anxious or whatever, or obsessive compulsive maybe. But it's, you know, it's, as Dr. Agrawal says, it's part of being human, and I think it's an interesting risk at this particular stage of life for a lot of medical students. But I can't remember who said it, but success is just a matter of getting up one more time than you've been knocked out.
And I think there's degrees of allowing mentees to fail as well. And so when you are my students, it'll be, I agree with everybody that failing is probably the best teacher of everything. But when you're my students, it may be I ask you to commit to a plan with the patient, but not allow you to do it. And so the great part about the relationship is we're here as a safety net, but we do have to allow your egos get knocked a little bit. But we'll protect you from, you know, hurting or anything, because you have to think that through, and you do have to make those mistakes before you learn the best way.
Question here?
One of the biggest hesitations I have to approaching people for advice or to shadow or anything like that is that I worry that it might be a burden on their time, and that I would perhaps just be using them and they might not get anything out of it. What advice do you have for people who worry that approaching someone for advice might just be a burden on their time and an annoyance to them?
I think most people in medical education are drawn to educational institutions because of the interaction with trainees of one sort or another. But there is a wide range of people you know, in the field, and some people might not really be drawn to that, or they might not respond. I mean, you might get rebuffed, but I think that's where the business of finding people who can help you and have an interest. There are quite a few around every institution.
The only thing I can add to that is unless you ask, you don't get it. Okay? And then it is your responsibility to go and seek any help you can and at least make an approach. And if you find the person who you are approaching is really concerned about you, as Father Zimmer said, then here you go. So you have to develop that type of relationship. At least you have to make an effort initially to approach the right person.
I would agree that I think the important thing is to be able to ask. But, you know, the people who are in educational institutions are really open to that. There may be some exceptions, but most of us are. I personally think that when somebody asks me a question or asks me for some help, it is actually I am the one who is being honored.
And I also give you a few examples. People come and ask me, then they don't follow up. That loses my interest in them. So at least it is the important point that even though you may not like me as a mentor, at least come and keep me informed what you are doing. You may go with somebody else.
There's another question back here. Yes.
As students, we're constantly searching for our passion or our subject of interest or what we want to do in our life and see happen. How do we reconcile as mentees who had former mentors in different areas of study or jobs or service or counseling or anything like that? How do we reconcile as mentees when you move on from something you've done in your past that you're not interested in anymore or your opinions have changed? And what is that viewed from your perspective as a mentor to see a mentee do that?
Well, that goes to my twin slide. But I decided what I was going to do in February of my 4th year. Everything was interesting to me, and so you'll find probably, especially I think among academic people, that we've changed our minds multiple times. We understand that, and it's important to be open to what's going to make you the most successful, and where your passion lies is what's going to make you most successful. So, and I think most people are going to recognize that, and I don't feel, despite my joking around about the twin thing, I don't feel like I've wasted my time with you just because you've decided to do something different. I still hope that, those basic principles are going to be with you no matter what path you're going to follow. So.
Just like a follow-up comment on what Joanne said, and that is the job of the mentor is not to make a twin, a carbon copy of themselves. This is a very important thing that when we train mentors, we tell them, is your job is to help your mentee discover who they are, what they want to do, and where they want to go, going back to what Dr. Agarwal said. And it's not in any way a failure. I'm not as young as Dr. Mohido is, but as we go through our lives, we discover new things. We learn as we go, and we grow, and we change. And that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. In fact, most of the time it's a very good thing. That you go on to do something different, something new, it's not necessarily a failure in that case.
It's a part of your self-discovery. That's critical.
I often sit down with my graduate students and ask them, most often, go back your home in the evening and sit down and think what you achieved today. How could you make it the day better than this? And very often I tell them. And initially they all say, oh yeah, we utilize our time very effectively and so on and so forth. At some point they come back and say, yes, Dr. Agarwal, you are right. We could have done it better. So you have to introspect yourself. You have to really look into yourself, what is the best for you, how best you can achieve during your years here, which is best for your future.
Other questions?
If I could offer one other comment. The panelists have done a wonderful job of describing different models of mentoring. And what I heard, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I heard this incorrectly from you, is the classic model, which is sort of a more experienced, more knowledgeable person mentoring someone who has less knowledge and experience. So it's the hierarchical model. But if you read about mentoring, one of the things you realize, and I think Joanne talked a little bit about that there are other people around you, and particularly your peers, who can also serve as your mentors. And they might know something more about a certain thing, and you might know something more about a certain thing, and it can be kind of a group mentoring or a peer mentoring kind of situation. So use those opportunities, and I think that's something special to the Jesuit philosophy, and what I have learned, and I'm still a student of Jesuit philosophy after 11 years being here, and many more as a trainee, is that the caring for others and the concern that you have about people who are around your fellow students, and their concern for you. So use that. That's a terrific opportunity that you have here that perhaps doesn't exist in the same way in many other institutions.
I'm wondering if I can maybe have us close by asking a general question. We've talked about a great variety of types of mentoring, and I'm intrigued by the notion of failure. And I'm wondering if failure, or maybe not just failure, but also the notion that perhaps we come to a point in our lives where we have to make a decision to move in a different direction. And it might be to leave one mentor behind, as Dr. Porter said, you find as a mentor that your mentee has chosen to move on, and that might not be failure exactly. It might be a reaction to, or recognition that life has different expectations than we're comfortable with in this area, and we need to move into a different area. And I'm wondering if any of our panelists might comment on that, or perhaps even if you're an experience in your life where you found that a mentor helped you maybe shift gears, or you helped someone else.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, Eric, as you're speaking is, and it may not be a great response, but it's my response.
And it's by definition great. and distinguished.
You know, when I first came to Creighton, the residency training director at the time was very preoccupied with retaining as many local graduates as possible. And I took issue with that, thinking that it's really our responsibility to get our graduates trained as well as they can be trained in a direction and an area that they felt most comfortable with. And furthermore, I think it reflects very well on the institution that there are Creighton graduates all over the country. I guess the take-home lesson is that if a mentor has a proprietary sense of ownership of someone, that's really inconsistent with the responsibilities and the primary nature of the relationship. You want to see children grow up, and you want to see people get on with their lives, and not everyone lives in Omaha, Nebraska forever.
I'll talk about a mentoring, when I was mentored, and it's a different bend on failure. I think you alluded to how, you know, we've been kind of top of our class and we get to medical school. And I remember doing my renal rotation as a third-year student. And I remember, you know, this is just like I say, this is a brief moment that I've never forgotten. And so, you know, you get to be a third-year student and you realize everything in the book, wow, it's not very helpful. And that was all black and white, and none of it applies. And the renal doctor said, Joanne, is he dehydrated or is he too full of fluid? And I'm looking at the x-ray and I'm looking at the lab and I'm looking at the patient. And I said, I don't know. And he said, you either got to try to take water off or water him, but the worst thing to do is not do anything. He goes, I do not want you being an intern overnight not doing anything. If you take the water off and he was dry to begin with, you can give him some more back. And you know, that has helped me, because I think fear of failure in physicians can paralyze you. And so that's just like a mentoring moment I've never forgotten. Can't remember the patient, but I remember the doctor.
I may also share with one of my experience in mentoring. I did my first PhD in clinical biochemistry in India and then came to McMaster to do second PhD. The very first month, my advisor told me to do some experiments. And I did not do those experiments. And every time I meet with him and he said, why didn't you do it? I kept quiet. After 3 weeks, he kept asking, I told you to do this experiment, why don't you do it? And that's the time I realized that I must speak up. The way we have been raised, at least the way I was raised in India, that don't speak too much against your boss as a full professor and so on. So I told him that this experiment does not make any sense. And he said, you are saying I'm wrong? I said, no, at least I don't understand the reason of doing this experiment, and this is why I did not do it. Explain to me. And he was mad. And after he listened to me, and he said, that is why I want you to stand on your feet, and you are right. If you have done those experiments, I would have been the first one to tell you, you wasted your time and money. And that was the day he left me alone. So the point is that in mentor and mentee relationship, you have to be open to each other and discuss it freely. You have a right to voice your thing. But if you criticize something, you should have a reason behind it. And it works both ways. And that's the way I've been working. I don't mind criticizing people, but I have my reason. I may be wrong. And I always, same thing I expect from others.
I think we are all afraid of failure. We are all afraid to think that this particular aspect of a problem and the way we have chosen to solve it may be correct. But think of it not as an end, but as a beginning. And think of it as something which will allow you to correct that at a later time, some other occasion. So my advice, and we have chosen the profession which is sometimes associated with failure. And sometimes those failures are devastating. But let that not discourage you. It's not the end of the pathway. It's just the beginning of a different one.
But at the same time, don't make the same failure again. So that's the one important aspect. Learn from that.
Don't do the same experiment.
It brings us to the end of our session. I want to thank the good doctors for their comments and insight and responses to our questions, and let's give them a big hand. Thank you.